Hi everybody, welcome to today's NBS webinar, the Building Safety Act for Everyday Projects. We've done two previous webinars similar to this on Building Safety Act, and we tended on both webinars to stray into the higher risk buildings, building safety regulator. And the feedback we got was, although they were excellent discussions, it would be nice to do a follow-up webinar looking at just your sort of everyday projects that go through sort of building regulations. A big thank you to Knauf, who are sponsoring this webinar. The webinar itself will be between about 45 minutes and the hour. Everyone attending's microphones are muted, but we always really like to see the feedback. Please feel free to ask questions as well, and we'll try to answer the ones we can. But yeah, just to introduce our speakers, our panelists today. My name is Stephen Hamil, Innovation Director at NBS. And of course, at NBS, we are got a big focus on getting documentation right on construction projects. In terms of my own personal experience, worked quite closely on the CCPI project with the CPA, and also chaired the Golden Thread Initiative subgroup on specifications that fed recommendations into the Building Regs Advisory Committee. And just maybe go through the panel, just let everyone do a brief introduction themselves, starting with yourself. Kerry, hi Kerry. Everything okay?
Yep. Hey, hi. I'm Kerry. I'm an architect and I've been a director for my own practice for the last 10 years. My work is mostly homeowners, definitely not high-risk buildings, and I do some small commercial work as well. I've been speaking on the REBA PD course last year for the last two modules or two sessions, but I definitely don't consider myself an expert, just sharing what I do and what I think are the right things to do.
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. And Das, I think like being called Das, not Andrew. Introduce
Yeah.
yourself, Das.
Morning all. Yes, thank you, Steve. Yeah, I'm Das from David Miller Architects, one of the technical directors and architect in the practice. Been with the practice for sort of 18 or so years. A lot of our work is in sort of residential, education, life science, etc. We're only recently getting asked to take on the BSA PD role. But obviously there are other projects which fall into today's discussion which don't need to go through the gate phase. And I've sort of been, guess in theory, doing a lot of research and being involved in discussions since 2007, and looking to kind of continue to share and learn from everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Das. And then move on to yourself, Ian.
Hi, I'm Ian McGilvey. Started life as a materials engineer, and I've worked in and around construction for the past 30 years. Most recently as CEO of the trade body finishes and interior sector and director of SCAR Rating. Our membership is made up of fit-out contractors and specialist subcontractors and their supply chain, and we service public, commercial and the house building sector. So our bit of the world is quite fast, it's fragmented, it's dominated by SMEs, with a number of specialist skills all coming together in a confined space. But normally towards the end of the programme, the budget's gone, the time's gone, and most of the tolerances have been exhausted, and we're trying to sort of make up for that on behalf of everybody. So from a design perspective, our members work they offer complete design and build. Some do innovative design, some do traditional build, and some do all of above. And we work across and focus on the higher risk buildings as well as all other building types. We don't get so involved in the small domestic works. A lot of what we do is technical guidance, dealing with problems, and we've been involved with Stephen on developing the CCPI. We've been heavily involved in the competency work, and we've developed training courses, guides, and everything else to support our members and the wider community in getting to grips with what is the biggest change in the building regs that we've ever known.
Yeah, yeah. And finally yourself, Liam.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Liam, Head of Marketing at Knauf Gypsum. So I've worked in the construction industry for 20 years now across both manufacturing and distribution. So I oversee our entire product portfolio, communications, digital initiatives, kind of overall go-to-market strategy here at Knauf. As a responsible manufacturer, we're obviously committed to staying closely aligned to the Building Safety Act as well as the construction design and management regulations. Our team has conducted extensive research to try and better understand the needs of key stakeholders throughout the various project stages, by doing so, hopefully we've kind of identified ways that we can support our clients navigate these processes more smoothly. So today, hopefully I'll be sharing some insights that will illustrate how Knauf can be a trusted partner in your building projects.
Excellent. Okay, I'll stop sharing my screen there, and yeah, we just have everybody's faces on the screen. I think just to sort of start things off in terms of terminology, when we talk about principal designer, principal contractor, for this webinar, we're talking about the roles under building regulations, not CDM. It'll just allow us to say principal designer as a sort of smaller mouthful. But maybe I think we'll sort of start with the design and then move all the way through to the sort of construction. So to start the conversation off, maybe yourself, Kerry, in terms of the RIBA's principal designer course, I imagine that a lot of architects going on that saying, what do these changes mean? For me, what are the main duties under that new role?
Oh, there's a bunch, aren't there? I think the main duties, we should really be doing most of these things already. I think that the part 2A of the building regulations legislation is where we should be looking to see specifically what we should be doing to comply, remembering that it is a legal situation that we need to comply with, and it applies to every single project that requires building regs approval. So domestic work is not exempt, and you know, if we're already competent and doing what we were doing previously before October 23 really well, it should just be an issue of paperwork, really. You know, making sure the client's informed, making sure your designers are informed if you're the principal designer. So yeah, that's probably it in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, and if let's just say the smallest of jobs, £200,000 house extension, architects being appointed, are there sort of standard letters and sort of professional services where it's outlined in terms of this, as these are my duties under principal designer, so you're letting the domestic, the homeowner client know what those duties are?
Yeah, so the REBA, if you remember, they've got templates that you can use for both commercial and domestic clients. I use that for informing my clients at the very start, so I include that in my fee proposal letter, so that they're aware from the very beginning that they need to have these people involved. The letter that I use, that's based on the REBA one, I've edited and altered to make it a little bit more hand-holdy, I guess, for domestic clients, with a bunch of links if they're an engaged sort of person that they can go off and read more in detail if they need to.
And right at the end of the job, that sort of handover phase, as I understand it, the principal designer has duties in terms of compliance and things. But I imagine on quite a lot of smaller jobs, the architects maybe only employed like up until tender. And how does that role of the principal designer change if you're not providing professional services through that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. So I end my services, which is often once building regs approval has been received, with a compliance letter or a statement that says that my services are finished. Make sure that you appoint someone as a principal designer and a principal contractor to take on the role through the construction phase. I'm here to help if you need me, but please check with your contractor that he's aware. I know that there's quite a lot of pushback on from small contractors saying that we're not competent. Where is the principal designer? Well, unfortunately, as an architect, I can only inform my clients that you need the person. And if they choose not to appoint someone, then, you know, it falls out of my hands. There's nothing I can do about it. So it's in making sure that the client is informed and that they're aware that they're not going to get their completion certificate from building control without the signatures of all those people involved through to the very end, the duty holders.
Yeah, those main parties, I guess, have both got to sign that at the end of the project: principal contractor, principal designer,
and the client.
Yeah. And to ask, I know, well, maybe could you say a little bit about the size of your practice, David Miller Architects, the sort of typical clients, and How does that work with the sort of maybe smaller commercial clients?
Yeah, thank you. We are about 25 of us in the team, split between Liverpool and London, the two offices. As I said in the introduction, a lot of our work is a combination of local authority and private clients, so it kind of spans between the two. The interesting thing, I think, in terms of this discussion is it's just the kind of making sure all parties are aware of their duties. I think there's been a lot of obviously kind of time about what the gateways are and how you may or may not need to get through them, etc. But I don't think there's been enough maybe advising and kind of upskilling the clients themselves in all different, so even in the work that we do with, say, private clients or those who are investing, millions of pounds in their projects, they themselves aren't aware of their actual new duties. So I think there's been a lot of focus on the gateways, etc., but not enough on the duties. So that's, I guess, probably what happened in when the CDM 2015, etc., came out as well, and with sort of the BIM as well discussions. The client upskilling is something that's missing. I think we need to do more on that for a start. So I think that's kind of where we need to start and put more effort into.
And across the projects that your practice is currently working on, are you performing that duty of principal designer through the construction stage on most of them, some of them?
No, so we've been appointed to do the BSA PD role on a couple of life science projects. So they're sort of large schemes in sort of 20, 30 million, but during stage 4. And the approach we took is that because we've not done it before, we took on an advisor as well as someone to kind of just double check things so we're not missing anything. As I said, I've been involved in the discussions with various groups, gone through the RIBA course and looking to go through the kind of formal registration at the moment. So I feel like in theory, has done as much background information as we can. And we're keen as a practice just to take on that responsibility of the PD and kind of activate it. But at the same time, mindful that we can't say that we've gone through that process and have an experience. So hence why we appointed an advisor, someone just to kind of be able to talk to and make sure we're not missing anything, but we would do all the work. We are getting inquiries very recently, actually, in the last couple of weeks, to work on projects to take them to act as a BSPD on projects all the way through. That's during the design and construction. So that'll be again a new experience, but one that we're kind of feel we are capable of. But again, we will kind of get advisory help just to make sure we're not missing something obvious. I think it's fair to say from the industry and the feedback, there's clearly no right answer. It's about proportionality. It's about making sure that you as a design team with the client are happy and understand the reasons you've done whatever you've done. And finally, we take the view that in the office, treat all projects as if they're going through the HRB gateway processes, even if they're not. That way, the team are kind of getting more and more used to documenting information, using all our digital workflows to kind of capture all of those decision taking and the audit trail and that golden thread requirements in all projects. So we're not kind of chopping and changing our methods, which can confuse everyone, including ourselves.
Yeah, and I guess on those projects, whereas it design changes through the construction phase or products get substituted, if the principal designer is no longer the architect and that duty is passed either to the main contractor or inadvertently to the client, they have a legal opportunity to check those changes, and they're potentially marking their own homework, sort of thing.
Yeah, I think the point there is that a lot of our projects are design and build, so D&B, and our view as well, at that stage when the contractor is appointed, they have the most influence over the design, and that some of the some contractors are understanding of that and they're willing to take that role. They've tried to upskill their team members. Some are not able to. So what's happening is that the legal entity is sort of remaining with the contractor, but they're asking for us as the advisor to be the advisor, and we would have to, I guess, do more than what an advisor would necessarily do. in that case. But the legal responsibility lies with the main contractor because they're directly appointed by the client. And again, it's a bit like CDM. There was that misconfusion that, or misunderstanding, I think, that the contractor can sort of appoint us as to be the PD, but I think it's critical to understand that it's the client who has to directly appoint, and that typically in a DMV would be the main contractor. So there's some sort of legal things, but to keep it simple, that's how we're moving it forward.
And Kerry, in terms of when you deliver the course, do you get feedback from the delegates that are undergoing it, and what are you hearing from those that are undergoing the RIBA course, or fellow professionals that are delivering that course?
I believe there is feedback that comes in. I don't hear an awful lot of it. It gets filtered through the RIBA, and they let us know any pertinent things. There's not an awful lot that seems to crop up on the domestic side of things. I understand that the people who've been attending, they've quite a lot fewer that are doing domestic work that are attending the course.
Yeah, and well, I've kept a close eye on what RIB have been publishing. I noticed there was the guide, the principal design, the guide. There was updated professional services contracts with template letters, and also it's almost like a building regs checker that goes through the approved documents and allows the architect to tell a story of how the design meets building regulations. Is that the sort of thing that the course goes through as well? All the resources available?
Yeah, some of the resources are shared. I think many of the resources like that tracker are more applicable to much bigger projects. I mean, it would consume most of my fee if I was to try and use something like that on one of my projects. It's completely disproportionate for domestic work. But there are various different tools that the course does touch on, and most of them are linked in some way during and after the course.
Yeah. And Liam, just moving on to the manufacturers, I guess what would your advice be to other manufacturers in terms of maybe how do you do things properly now as a manufacturer in this new sort of building safety regime?
Yeah, it's a great question because there's so many different ways that we can move around in this space. But I think I would start with by referencing the quality framework that the team at the FIS put together, and that framework covers that whole piece around product, process, and people. And I think that's an absolutely solid framework to kind of start looking at yourself as a business. So in product terms, for us at Knauf, that's our drywall systems. So we must ensure that we provide those robust solutions that are going to meet the performance requirements of our specific builds, for the projects that our customers are wanting to achieve. So we make sure we do that with good level of up-to-date data, clear and accurate information, and we kind of make that as fully visible in that space for our customers. When you look at process, early on we worked with CCPI to gain our accreditation to demonstrate how we can manage change effectively within our manufacturing processes, and to demonstrate how that we've got a good culture within the business that's going to promote safety, and that we can provide the market with what they need in regards to information support. I think that's massive in terms of making sure that you can demonstrate those processes so that as anything changes, you can quickly react to it. You can quickly inform your customers who may have designed that build 2 years ago. They need to know that something has changed that may affect their build, and we've got to be able to demonstrate that we can control and manage that. And then finally, within that framework, people. So as Knauf, we want to make sure that we've got competent people supporting our customers in their projects, no matter the stage, regardless of the size of that project. So we're investing in consistent, high quality training for our people, whether that's covering acoustics, thermals, fire, changes in regulation, etc., etc. But we need to make sure that our people understand what they can talk about competently, what the limitations are within there, so that we can advise in the best way possible. And that's been a difficult space over the last couple of years, and we've made sure that for every single role within our business, we have a framework in place that says this is what you need to be able to demonstrate competently. And we are starting to notice now that contractors, architects are starting to ask for evidence of our competence of our people as well here. So we need to be able to demonstrate that with our kind of training certificates that we've got in place as well. But I think those principles across product, process, and people that apply to all jobs, no matter the size. Doesn't matter if that's a high risk building or anything. And as Das says, for us, every build is high risk, and I think we kind of we take that approach as well at the same time to make sure we kind of keep that common level of principles and that for our own kind of golden thread, if you will, through those different bits, because we want to ensure that we've got great high standards in the industry.
And I noticed that you do have CCPI certification for a number of your products and systems. For other manufacturers watching on saying, I've heard about this, but what is it? How does it help? Can you say a little bit about what that actually is?
Yeah, sure. So obviously within the construction code for product information gives us that framework so that we can all kind of have that commonality in terms of how we talk about our products, take away that some of the grey areas and the way that we may describe bits. But the key bit for CCPI for me is really being able to take a look internally at your business to say, can we support our customers in the best way possible here? Are we getting out safe and reliable information that is backed, that is documented, that is evidenced? Have we got the processes in our business to regularly test products? Can we demonstrate that? Have we got the processes in our business that if anything changes within the manufacturing process? So for us, that could be changing an ingredient. If we change an ingredient, however small within a board, we have to know, have we then retested that product so it's still at the minimum still achieves what we've said it will achieve. And if it doesn't, if something has changed within that performance, and in the worst case scenario that performance has fallen backwards, we need to know that we can identify where those products have gone. We need to know that we can make contact with our customers to say, look, something has changed here that you need to be aware of. And I think that's a brilliant part of the CCPI process in terms of making sure that you're outlining these frameworks within your business, that you can competently demonstrate to somebody, yes, we have a process in place here which is going to help to protect you as far as we can within our products and systems.
And then I guess your product information, your current product information will be scattered across PDF data sheets, your own website, distributor websites, specification platforms. How do you then, it must be a tough job, but how do you then keep all of that updated?
I very early stages described this as almost the spider's web. And it was really difficult to know. Historically, a document would disappear, and we don't know what happens to that ultimately. But as a responsible manufacturer, we said, okay, we are going to work with the platforms where we know we can control this data. And MBS is a great example of that. So making sure that we've got that version control in place, that as somebody downloads a specification or detailing, whether that's from our website, whether that's from MBS, whether that's from our own system finder platform, we know that that's the latest version of that document, and we've got all those revised pieces in place. But what we're trying to do is make sure we're working with the platforms that have that control that we're after as well, so that we can kind of offer one version of the truth as far as we can.
Kerry, I imagine on any level of job, you will specify a certain amount of products, systems by brand. Where do you go? What looks good in terms of getting the right information that gives you the confidence you're finding the right product that does the right job?
Oh, trick question. Yeah, I guess it's a lot of products that I've specified before, seen them in use, so I have confidence from that point of view. But looking at the data sheets that are provided online, I honestly say that I don't tend to phone up manufacturers too often because the technical staff often don't know enough about what it is that I'm asking. So I rely heavily on what I find online.
I guess you're looking at those key building safety properties, and is it backed up with at least sort of CE marking and third-party certification where?
Yeah, for the things that are relevant and necessary, a concrete block. It's a concrete block, right? Although, I'm looking at the thermal performance and other things. So it really does depend on which piece of or which item it is.
Yeah, and that's maybe working on a bigger, more complex job where you get sort of human technical support on maybe the specification, right, or standard details, etc. What's sort of a good example of the sort of correct behavior and support that you like to see?
I think go back to the couple of the main words about sort of communication and coordination, and as Liam was alluding to, kind of knowing when your product doesn't do something. that can be quite frustrating when you've gone to, or the contractor's gone to various suppliers, they've got the job, but then actually then say later that couldn't do it, and that leads to a whole world of sort of difficult decisions and changes and etc. So that being able to kind of define and say when the product can do it or can't do it, we've sort of looked to create these sort of master specifications in sort of combination of using MBS Chorus and all our Revit content, not just a library of products, but assemblies which are compliant. So that could be, for example, bathrooms which are compliant with M43. And that we're trying to help from a design point of view, spatially within the team, but then working with our head of spec to make sure that he is keeping tabs of those products, those manufacturers, and linking that together. So again, just trying to make sure that when we are rolling these products, assemblies, or systems through, they are getting checked. And I think just that openness and I think that's going to be more and more the case going forward, because no one is going to want to have to change, whether it's a HRB going through the gateways or not, because ultimately that will cost time, money, and delays, especially when you look at timescales for approvals, let's say for HRBs, which are much longer than they were obviously anticipated to. So the idea of just getting it right and make sure we can specify when required and getting that honest feedback from the clients, from the supply chain.
Yeah. And Ian, I know we've been talking about the sort of earlier stages for the first sort of 15, 20 minutes here, but we're sort of getting, let's say, I'm going to ask you two questions here. Let's say it's the sort of design and build job where the main contractor's coming in midway through the design and it's split into contractor sub-packages. There's areas that the architect's got design responsibility for, structures, building services. The first question is, how should that get done properly? And then the second question is, based on when you talk to your members, what you're seeing out there, what are the sort of real life challenges that we're seeing?
Can I answer those in reverse order, Steve?
Okay,
is that right? Because it probably makes sense to do it that way around. I mean, again, if we just think about what we've heard, design, we know design's an iterative process. We know it relies on collaboration, communication, and that requires careful coordination, right? I honestly don't believe the regulations were written with the regulator thinking the designer was going to disappear so early in the process. Right? And I think that's one of the fundamental problems we face. I don't think the regulation was ever written with that in mind. And the regulation is about duty. And what's kind of happened is everybody started to focus on what they don't do or what they don't want to do rather than what needs to be done. And that's why we're seeing sort of almost the industry getting better and worse at the same time. So the level of risk that's being pushed down the supply chain, the fragmentation of design elements within packages, the inadequacy of the contracts to manage that. We were talking a little bit before we came online, some of the contracts that are signed now, it's not just clear design and build contracts or construction contracts. You get these sort of hybrid states where the contractor is responsible for checking the compliance with the existing regulations, which effectively conveys design responsibility further and deeper into the supply chain. And nobody's being rewarded for that. And I think what we've realised is how much of this stuff was just done. Right, it was just people getting together and working it out on the fly. So much of the design's done in stage 5, not in stage 4, stage 3, or stage 2, and I think that's what's got to change. Right, so in terms of sort of moving forward, that's what's got to change. If you look at it, the advice and guidance has been quite clear that's coming out in certain areas. So there's a brilliant piece of guidance, the REBA CIB Guide to Managing Safety Critical Elements, cracking, really, really well thought through document. Design of any it says this: design of any element and the design of its interfaces with other elements must be complete and, where relevant, signed off prior to commencement of the construction of that element. And that seems really logical, makes common sense. And when you overlay that with the work we've done on PPP, the product process people stuff that Liam mentioned, all sounds great. Our problem is that the interfaces are seldom thought through. And we're quite often building stuff and trying to work out how to interface two packages together. And this is kind of the problem. We fractionalize the risk into the supply chain, and there is a lack of coordination. I don't think the regulator ever thought that we're going to have principal designers and principal contractors. They thought that was going to be an exception rather than the rule. But our world is that's very, very common now. And I'd love to know, of those 1,000 projects that went through, how many of the original architects is still involved in, So this is going through the gateways of the high risk building. I think there's been 1,000 applications. I'd like to know how many of those 1,000 have got the principal designer as the sort of the lead architect, and how many it's the PD and the PC are the same, because I suspect it's very much the latter. So I think we've kind of written these processes, we've written these regulations on an assumption of the way the industry works, but that isn't how it works. And I've got some stats here which sort of back that up. We did some work just specifically looking at dry liners, right? So dry line, the internal compartmentation of most projects now, certainly outside of the small domestic. And how often are you asked to commence with construction without sufficient design details to adequately detail the construction? 2% said never, and 82% said in the majority of cases or frequently. The designs aren't being sufficiently developed to enter the construction phase. So following that, we did some work with the University of Reading, and we asked some more detailed questions about design of the whole supply chain. So this is a little bit of a catch-all in terms of data. We asked, if you asked to submit design information for approval, so now we're in the change process, you asked to submit design information for approval. We've seen someone on site, we don't know what to do about it. We think this is the best thing to do, so we're going to go back into the design process to check that to ensure it's coordinated. How often do you receive a decision within the specified contractual limit? 27% never, and 1% said always. Only 36% in total was more than half the time. So we rely on these processes. We talk about the plan of works. The plan of works was never intended to deal with this. It was more about when stage payments of architects would be released. And we don't really have details of what should be completed at stage 3, what should be completed at stage 4. And to get around that, we make up other terms. So we talk about stage 3+, stage 4+, and we push that risk down in supply chain. So I'm really concerned about the direction of travel. And again, so if we look at, if I break that down into 5 things, so when we've sort of analysed our research, so we've come up with 5 key problems. Design development is not always sufficient to accurately price work. And then we kind of assume that design is going to happen through procurement, but it's all done under pressure without enough time to really develop the design. So what we're getting is indicative prices. The tools we had to manage that, like provisional sums, are bullied out in the contractual process, so that people are taking far too much risk of an underdeveloped design into the supply chain. Design responsibilities are not always managed and effectively set by the design team. So the design responsibility matrix is seldom developed early enough, and gaps are almost never identified before we start construction. There's an inconsistent approach. Again, standardized, normalized, industrialized to drive change. We have not standardized the innovation process in any way, shape, or form. And it's very blurred around the edges as to whose duty is doing what. And designers are pressured to take more responsibility outside of their scope. So if I've got a dry lining contractor, they might be able to focus on building the dry lining system within Liam's warrant. But what about the interface between the petition and the external, the externals or the facade, or how are we interfacing with the structure? Who's thought about the fixing details? And again, a lot of this stuff is left too late and done on the fly.
That very first stat, I think was the first big stat you went for, where construction starting without the design being suitably complete. Is that something that should get caught, sort of picked up by building control, the local authority building control, or the inspector should be, the principal designer should be saying, I've planned, managed and monitored this using a design responsibility matrix with the right people to show that it meets the regulations.
I think this is where I worry, because there isn't really a standardized approach. We almost bespoke these relationships on any job. Remember, every single standard form contract is rewritten in reality. So we don't actually have standard form contracts. So a lot of these duties aren't very well defined contractually. And again, if you look at, say, a mobilization, take the dry lining contractor I've mentioned earlier. If you look at the mobilization times of a dry lining contractor, from contract to order starting on site, the average is 3 weeks, right? The norm is 2, and that's pulled up by the fact some people get 3 or 4 months. It can be Friday to Monday type stuff without adequate detailing, and people are going to be doing that on site. And I think the bit that I can't remember who said it earlier, the regulation isn't, the Building Safety Act has been written to change the way that we design and build projects. The higher risk, the gateway projects, set down a reasonable approach to doing that and have defined change control processes with major notifiable changes, right? What the building regulator is not saying is if it's not a higher risk building, you can forget all of that. What they're saying is we're not going to check your homework, not in this to the same level of detail. So we're not going to check everything to the same level of detail prior to starting work. But the expectation, I believe, is that's how we run projects.
Yeah, because if something goes wrong, like touch wood, 6 or 7 years later, it's going to be, okay, where are the records? Show me that you did that golden thread. Even though you didn't have to submit it, show me that you've done that golden thread.
Exactly that. And the liabilities are much higher as well, right? Now, so the building control's got a lot more power of enforcement. The sanctions that they can impose are much higher. So the risks are high. And so everyone's kind of now getting to that point where they're starting to realize they need to change. Everybody's defining themselves by what they're not prepared to do or what they're not paid to do. And ultimately, we're just leaving this risk and it's being soaked up and I love the fact you said through the supply chain rather than down the supply chain, Stephen, so thank you for that, because people often say down the supply chain and it certainly isn't down, but that sometimes you do feel like that's you talk about what rolls downhill.
So the people watching this webinar now saying, okay, like, tell me how it should be, what looks perfect, what's the proper way of doing that?
Well, we've taken the PPP, and I'm not going to pretend I've got all the answers, right? So before, but if you take that PPP approach, product process people, it really isn't rocket science. And we've thought about this really heavily and hard as an industry before, but we all got a bit BIM bored, right? Because everyone got turned over by a BIM consultant selling them a dream of technological optimism that it never really fulfilled. But actually, BIM does lay down a really clear process for how we should be exchanging information. And if you look at 19650 as a standard, it talks about critical information exchange points. And I think that's what we've got to get back to. The golden thread, the common data environment, is very clearly defined in some of those standards. And I believe as a process, that's what we've got to do. And I think it's up to organizations like us. I think, I'm not criticizing the architectural world. I think, the buildings have got a lot more complicated, right? So there's so many more details, penetrations, combinations of products have got more complicated. So that the permutations of the options, the choice we have to build is much greater than it used to be. So I think you've got to go back to that simple process of what information do people need and when, and starting to set that design responsibility matrix early, and I think if we're going to use a process to define that, I would go back to 19650 or BS 8644, which has taken the safety critical components, and let's start to look at how and who we exchange information. And then we go back to descriptions or descriptive or prescriptive design, and we deal with them in terms of a different way of risk. So if it's a prescriptive design, then we know there's more development to be done. If it's descriptive, what elements need to be descriptive? If you're doing a descriptive design, let's make sure the interfaces have been thought through at the start. And again, sometimes I think that's the issue. We talk about product all the time, but interface is almost always our problem. Almost always our problem.
And that's, I'm going to come, you hear that role of, let's just say lead designer, but it's not just the partitions, that could be contractor design, it could be the cladding, the roofing, there's also the building services, sprinklers. How, as lead designer or principal designer, do you plan, manage and coordinate to make sure that what Ian's describing there goes as smoothly as possible?
Yeah, and I think in very much to what Kerry was noting at the beginning, the technical requirements haven't changed, and that what we've been doing, I guess, up to now and continue to do is like that, the DTMs, the workshops, etc. But I think it has to ultimately come back to the making sure the client is also aware of their duties and responsibilities, because ultimately they set the tone. We can help as the design lead to set the tone, and I think I was talking previously about the going to site, seeing the teams on site. I mean, obviously it's a little bit further down the line, but actually kind of getting experience of the products as well. So because you've got to set the culture, and the culture needs to come really ideally from the client, but they will also need to be helped to understand their duties, because if the procurement isn't done at the right time, then things get forced, and then pressures start to build up. So that's kind of where we're starting from. But I think in terms of having workshops, regular communication, regular meetings, using all the digital tools, is something we continue to do to try and make sure we're not missing something doesn't go through the cracks. And using like the RIBA, the compliance sort of tracker or Excel spreadsheet, just as a way of keeping tabs on and not forgetting something themselves. Take the view that essentially we've got to act as the approved inspector, as the old phrase, and make sure that the work that we are working along with the other teams and coordinating is makes sense to us. If it doesn't make sense to us, then something isn't quite being questioned enough, or we've made too many assumptions down the design line. So that's in many ways not changed much, but in other ways just kind of continue to tell everyone and making sure they understand their roles and their duties in the bigger picture. And then all the teams are there, all the technical information is there. We just heard from Ian and Liam. So yeah, in many ways not changed much, but we just make sure we keep on upskilling and don't assume anything and question things as we go through the process.
Can I hop on just a second?
Go on, Lee.
Yeah, it's just a point that how we communicate with clients is really important. Because again, if we talk to them about duties, responsibilities, my experience, and I've worked in mediation in Kerry's world as well, is once you've appointed somebody, the client kind of feels they've done their job, right, and everyone else is going to look after that. That's what they're paying us for, right? That's the way that they view it. I think sometimes it's really important to talk to them about other things other than just compliance. And I don't know if people saw the Construction Leadership Council put out a statement about professional indemnity insurance. It got a bit lost. It was around about October time last year, but it was talking about the way that we contract and manage work. And the danger is if all of these responsibilities, if the process isn't set right at the start, and I think architects can specify process as well as product, but if that process isn't set right at the start, there's a very real danger that the building is going to end up uninsured, because we're leaning on professional indemnity insurance. If the principal designer is passing risk because they're not insured to do it, the likelihood of anyone else operating in a less regulated profession being able to pick up that design responsibility is sometimes remote, right? So if we're relying on a dry liner's professional indemnity insurance to cover an interface detail between a facade and a dry lining compartment, the likelihood is they're not insured. So if the builder's not insured, the building's not insured. And I think that's something clients do need to wake up to, that they're potentially leaving themselves with stranded assets and uninsured buildings by not allowing an effective process beyond the compliance issues.
Yeah. And Liam, with so many parties on scales of projects of widely different sizes, how as a manufacturer do you get that right level of support offering?
Good question, and it's constantly another balancing act in terms of how we best serve the right person at the right time at the right stage of the project. So we'll take a few different routes through this. So in terms of we want people to kind of self-support as much as possible. So it would be remiss of me not to mention MBS again in terms of a platform that will allow people to do that. We'll place our information there to do it, but also within our own website in terms of knauf.com or our system finder platform as well. They're there so people can view our systems. They can filter based on those performance requirements. They can write the specification with the most up-to-date information and download all that data that they need to support their specification facts. Kerry said exactly what we see all the time in terms of people want to use online more and more. That's where they want to go for the information because it's quick. I can get there, do it at my own pace. I don't have to ring somebody who might not know what they're on about, because these are the kind of comments that we hear. So we want to make that as easy as possible and take away as many of those barriers as we can. But we also know the in-person bit is super important as well. Now, once we come to a kind of a practice-based solution, we'll come into those practices with our specification teams, whether that's delivering CPDs, RIBA accredited if needed, design and specification workshops, etc., just to go, look, we're here as the support mechanism. Come and talk to us while we're here. We can help and advise on this design here. And also when it comes to site-based as well, we know that on-site things happen all the time. The design versus an as-built situation can be very different, and actually we want to be there to support at that point to say, okay, that is okay, that does work, that is within the fields of application, that is within the tolerances, because we want to be able to react quickly within that world in terms of any situation there will slow down the build, which nobody wants. And of course, we've got a technical helpline to give that immediate support where needed as well. So we try and cover as many bases as we can there.
Where's the boundary between excellent technical support and taking on the design responsibility? How do you get that right on the larger projects where you are offering that support?
Yeah, so obviously we'll support with the provision of data, those fields of applications, test reports, and in some cases we'll offer that kind of bespoke testing if required. But we are not the principal designer or the principal contractor. But we understand that we've got to contribute as per our obligations as part of the Building Safety Act or CDM as well. So that is a balancing act. We can only advise. We'll give them those kind of tested situations for our applications, but we advise at that point.
And I just want to come on to sort of, I'm going to use the word golden thread, and I know people might think different, but that whole sort of documentation chain of proving that you've done things properly. I've recorded all the drawings, how the drawings have been revised, the spec, maybe communications. And from what I understand, there's an obligation, forget about high risk projects, on every project to keep a record of that, maybe through the building's lifetime even. Now, just on a really, really simple level, I bought a house a year and a half ago, and when I got the documentation, warranties, I burnt it on an external hard drive and put it in the drawer, and I put it on Google Drive, just as a sort of, maybe stop yourself, Kerry. What technology do you use just to make sure a few years' time you can go back to it and say, I did things properly on that job?
I guess modern low tech, Microsoft Word, PDFs. But in terms of the record keeping stuff, I do a design risk management document early in the process, and that looks at CDM stuff, but it also looks at building regs pieces of the puzzle, things that are there almost as a reminder as we go forward in the process, because I do it quite early at REBA stage 2. And then that's then developed, or that's given to the different designers as they come on board, and the client for their own record. But then that's formalized at building regs stage. I do, even for domestic work, we don't need to have the whole golden thread competence, compliance information, or compliance, not competence. So the part of my specification demonstrates how the project complies with the relevant requirements, the Schedule 1 of the building regulations. I think we need to keep remembering that this whole principal designer stuff is related to the relevant requirements, the functional requirements. It's not the approved documents. So there is something different there. And that's all we have to demonstrate compliance with. We don't need to show every little tiny detail. So that's part of that compliance information is part of my specification, and it links back to documents, or it links back to drawings and the specification itself, different clauses in the specification. So that's kind of building on my if I never need to refer back, just to check that things have been done right, and then just document issue sheets. Something really basic, and making sure that that the client is informed of what has been approved at the end of the process, when my role tends to end.
I guess the client gets a copy of the critical documentation.
Of course they do.
Yeah, they might want to sell that house in 5 years' time, and this is all.
Whether they read it or not is not my problem, as long as I have complied with my duties, and I can refer back to it, and I can refer the contractor to it, because invariably the contractor will say, well, where is X? Then I've done all I can do.
And that's working on tens and tens of projects a year, 20, 25 colleagues. Can you confidently say 2 or 3 years ago when we worked on this project, here's that evidence of what we did, and we did it properly, sort of thing?
Yeah, and to be fair, because of some of the or not because of some, because of the ISO, for example, accreditations we have, we get audited sort of yearly anyway. So there are various audit checklists that we've already had in place from very early on, because even when we were a smaller practice, wanted to use sort of big practice systems, but have the sort of agility of small practice. So those kind of things were embedded already. But as Kerry's saying, using technology where we can to kind of improve those things. So as I noted, the ability to use we use Revit and MBS in terms of plugins for the specs, for example, content library that we created, which has products or systems, assemblies, and then even the kind of digital checking process using the BIM 360 or moving on to like the ACC, which is the new name for the platform, I guess. So we're mindful that we need to make sure that we are doing everything that we can within the office to make sure we've got our golden thread. And I think the reality is there'll be multiple golden threads creating, some sort of rope or strand, I guess reality is. And then that'll be, as I say, made that shareable, whether it's packaged up and handed over, if our appointment's finishing at a particular stage, or maybe that information needs to go onto someone else's common data environment, like the contractors, for example. Inevitably, there'll be lots of different interfaces. So we're going to try and keep it as simple as possible, down as kind of low tech in many ways. So it is shareable, it is kind of usable as time goes through. But to be honest, there's lots of sort of more technologically based people who can deal with that kind of element of it. We just try to make sure we follow those audits, those checklists, the internal checking processes, etc. Make sure we've got we've taken all the necessary steps we can, the due diligence.
And in terms of maybe the safety critical products and systems, are you taking a local copy of their certification and what the manufacturer was saying at the time of the specification and literally burning it onto a hard drive? Or how does that work in practice?
Within the BIM 360, for example, when we get information from supplier specialists, we're kind of saving that into in particular folders. So it'll be sort of shared manufacturers, whatever it might be. So we're kind of, as I say, downloading that digitally into our system or common data environment, and that's what we're using. And then with the specification side, using the MBS Chorus platform, for example, we're kind of taking that confidence in that, as Liam's alluded to there, the products, if you're specifying now, have obviously got the correct and the most up-to-date information as well. So it is a chain of command, really. We rely on each party to do their thing correctly, and that's why that continual sort of questioning, not in a rude way, but just kind of question and kind of not making too many assumptions. And also, one thing which would be quite nice, I think, is more from manufacturers, is to kind of know what is the exception to when they can use that product. I think we get a lot about, it's fire rated, it's acoustics, blah, blah. Somewhere in the hidden small print is, oh, by the way, you can't use this next to X, Y, and Z. And that is where we need more clarity, because it doesn't help anyone if we've assumed various things. It all looks great, gets aside, and oh yeah, by the way, did you not read that small print? So that is something I've spoken before and kind of advised various manufacturers at your event, for example, as well. It's that the exceptions are actually more important in a way to us designers. As Ian said, the permutations is so much more nowadays, that those are the things that we need to know more so than all the other minutiae.
And just this conversation could easily go on for another half an hour, but we're sort of coming to the last 4 or 5 minutes. I was just hoping to finish by going around everyone and just saying, if there's people listening to this conversation today and want to find more information out, especially in your area, manufacturing or sort of interior sector, where would be the resource that you say, this is a great place to go and find out more? Maybe start with yourself, Ian.
I just want to touch on very briefly before I do. Reasonably foreseeable risk. That's baked in this regulation. So when we talk about how we pass information across, do keep that in mind. We're designing buildings not just for handover phase, but for their life now. And the regulation really is forcing us to think about that. Just so in terms of where you can get useful resource, I'm going to give you one link: www.thefis.org/no, and that's our Responsible No campaign. And our Responsible No campaign is all about operating within your competence. Linked to that page, we've got all of the PPP stuff that Liam referenced, so the product process people guidance that we've produced. We've also got some really deep technical guidance on how we put together walls as a system, for example, how we manage penetrations or we preempt issues with penetrations. You know, often design goes to head in a handcart once the M&E design's been done and we're trying to form the compartments around it. So there's a lot of really good specialist guidance on there that we've developed with our community, our manufacturers, specialist subcontractors. So the www.thefis.org/know.
Nice one. We'll make sure that all these links are put in the follow-up email to all people attending the webinar today. Maybe yourself, Liam?
Yeah, so I think the HSE do a fantastic series of webinars on series of videos on YouTube. I've also found the RICS website really useful for information relating back to this one, and I'm also going to self-publicize based on a couple of Das's comments just then in terms of a document that we've just released on services and openings in dry linings, because we know that's a huge issue which has come up a couple of times on here as a resource for people as well.
Nice. And Das, yourself?
Well, I think on the point about trying to inform the kind of all parties, the gov.uk website is very good, because that is something that all sort of, let's say, lay people, clients, whether they're domestic, or should be more aware of, rather than necessarily the niche ones around even RIBA or the HSE, etc. But so the gov.uk is one that's good, because obviously that is what the regulations and the kind of the guidance is kind of clearly boils down to. I'm also obviously with the RIBA, but there are other groups like the Architectural Technical Leads Group and the BIM for Housing, which are all kind of voluntary knowledge sharing platforms, and you can just sort of join and request to join. And they're very valuable in terms of just hearing from real life experience. It's a bit like Chatham House. No one really, people are very open on those platforms, because we've got to all help each other to get through, obviously continue to do what we were doing well, and then learn more about that kind of procedural changes that we need to get right proportionally, as sort of Ian has alluded there as well. So there's a lot of good stuff in there. And one thing, just as an architect, is we try not to think about designing in packages, which is where interfaces, all those things kind of get lost. But we've got to think about the building or the spaces holistically. The packages are really down to how you may procure those bits and bobs, and that's part of the skill of the QSs and the procurement team. But if you don't think in packages, you're more likely to get a holistic building and spaces that work and are compliant.
Nice. And Kerry, a good place for architects to go to find out more if they've been interested in the topic today? Read
Part 2A of the building regulations. The most logical, sensible thing you can do. I mean, if you haven't read that, then, well, you're missing a trick there. And then the next REBA PD course starts at the end of April. So I guess if you can afford it, do it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I'd like to just bring this part of the webinar to a close now. Massive thank you, Kerry, Liam, Ian, and Das. It's been great talking to you all. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for attending today. I've just flashed on the screen here what one resource we have got at MBS is, well, we've got lots of articles on Building Safety Act, but we do have one page which we tried to keep up to date, just with some really useful links. So government publications, and then articles from the likes of sort of BSI and RIBA, HSE, SIB, CI/D, etc. So we'll send that link through in the email. And just to finish by saying, yeah, thank you everybody for attending the webinar today. Please stay on for a couple of minutes and give feedback, because it's always really good to see the feedback afterwards. If you want to know more about MBS platforms and services, we didn't talk about those at all really today, but yeah, Google MBS Chorus, MBS Source, and finally, thank you to Knauf, who are today's sponsor. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.